Good day and welcome to a new update in which, of course, we're going to talk about the fact that Bitcoin is back to $48,000. It is truly impressive to see that Bitcoin has seen a rally to 48k, 49 actually, prior to the ETF, and now we're back to those levels due to several circumstances which have been impacting the market. Now, first of all, if you are enjoying the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me to get a larger audience to make more educational content towards you, as I'm definitely going to focus on that in this year. Actually, we are doing that already. We're doing it twice a week, but perhaps if you become one of us, we can do it multiple times in the week or make more professional content. When we talk about the markets at this point, I think there are a few important parts that we need to discuss prior to actually discussing the price action of Bitcoin. If you recall correctly from a few months ago, then I was repeating a case that Bitcoin is likely going to hit 48k prior to the ETF. That probably is going to stall as a resistance zone. Then we're going to have a correction, not to 30k, because 30k is not the level that I think we're going to have. If you look at the entire market, it seems more legitimate to have a correction of between 20 to 30%. We had one to 38k. And as a matter of fact, it is super beautiful to see that at 48k, it's just all over the place. There was such an hype expecting the markets to reach 100k based on the ETF. Prior to the ETF launch took place and Bitcoin peaked as the prices have been reversing due to the outflow on Grayscale. And then at 38k, all of a sudden the sentiment became, okay, so there's more to come from Grayscale, so we just need to wait until Grayscale is done with the selling, and then we start to go up again, so perhaps Bitcoin goes to 30k. Well, actually, those are the moments that it is actually bottoming out, and we saw that. And now Bitcoin is back to 48k at the moment of shooting, in which, to be fair, my theory of a range-bound construction between 38 to 48k is perhaps not true, and I give it a significant chance that we still are going to have something like it, but we are probably going to run to like 51k. But to be fair, as we are still 2 months prior to the actual halving and see this type of strength, I honestly believe that we are going to go higher, because there are topics underlying the price action of Bitcoin that are actually more important to understand, which is the one that I have on the screen. It is the interview that we have done with, I would have loved to do the interview actually, but I didn't do it. But before we are able to continue talking about the price action of Bitcoin, I would like to start with the price action of Bitcoin back in 850 and talk about the actual impacts that price action had for the price action currently. So bear with me. No, we're not going to do that. But the interview is actually more important. I think the whole world has seen that what Russia's view is. Perhaps it's propaganda. Perhaps he has an agenda to get Trump into the elections, or at least change the elections. Who knows? I think what I've seen is that we probably are getting too much info from the Ukraine case and not from Russia. But a few points are important, which is money rules the world. So money and resources, actually. The resources they do have, Russia. The money they do not have, or at least they do, but like the US is the world reserve currency. Putin mentioned multiple times that the 33 trillion debt is a huge issue, and it is. And actually, I've done an interview with the Gold Republic a few weeks back. It was posted 2 days ago, in which I mentioned that the glorious phase for Bitcoin is not this bull cycle. You might think it is when the markets are going to go up, but actually the impact of Bitcoin going to outperform any other asset class is because there is an underlying fear in that the US dollar is going to collapse. So the reasoning that Bitcoin is going to do well is the fact that the US dollar is about to collapse or the brink of collapse. And most of the people don't even look at this case. They just live their lives. It's great, whatever. But here we see Putin mentioning that's a huge issue. It is the US allies are downsizing their USD reserves. Everybody is looking for ways to protect themselves, and yet everybody, or like a big chunk of middle class, are buying properties, are spending all the money they have, are not thinking about their future because the past 20 years have been great, but what if it goes wrong? That's just not the question. But if it happens, it's disastrous. So the point is that in my theory, the US is screwed, which means that the fact that Bitcoin is going to go well in the coming years is due to the fact that people are feared about the US dollar. That's also why I think the impact of the approval of the ETF is more significant than you might imagine. And I'll just swap towards what the inflow is, but the inflow is so positive at this point that even large investment funds are jumping into Bitcoin as a hedge for not inflation, but for the case of potential bankruptcy of the US dollar. I think that's just a very, very reliable argumentation to have. That's also why I think that investing in certain countries after this bull cycle is definitely something you should look out for. But coming to a conclusion is that investing into Bitcoin as a hedge against the potential bankruptcy of the economy is probably the more important part rather than hedging against inflation. So the fact that Bitcoin is doing well is due to the fact that there is such a high level of fear on the actual economy, because ultimately if the economy was so great and the financial money and the US dollar and everything surrounding it was so great, Bitcoin would never be established. So the reason why Bitcoin became an important topic or why it exists, that actual use case is there right now. And then the most difficult concern is that probably from a price perspective and from an adoption perspective, in the coming few years, we're going to have a massive bull cycle comparable to the dot-com bubble. It's going to go higher than we expect. I don't believe in diminishing returns. I think it's even going to be higher at this point. You could suggest that $500,000 per Bitcoin is realistic. Then a big crash takes place because liquidity crunch all across the world. And from there, I think the real significant adoption for Bitcoin is going to take place. That's just my theory. And I think I'm going to cover that topic even more in the coming period. But I guess that's what we're looking at this point. Now, when we're looking at the ETFs, and if you want to watch the interview and if you want to get some historical background about Russia, which are hard to follow but are cool to know, just watch the interview. I think it shows so much about the macroeconomic impacts that we usually are not seeing because we live in Europe or the US. All right? Asia is different. Middle East are different. I think you should be there in those regions, to be fair, if you want to have a future. It's just the case. So when we're looking at the ETF, the memes are great. The memes are absolutely fantastic. So perhaps the interview with Putin has an impact on the market. Zero proof, zero actual correlation, but who knows? What we see is an inflow on the day itself of 400 million positive. All right. So the total flow is more than 2 billion at this point since the actual launch of the ETF, which is a massive impact in the markets. It shows that even day after day after day, there's more inflow than outflow at this point. So there is a substantial interest, and also Grayscale's impact is lowering at this point. So what does this tell? I'll just go through it. Grayscale had a Bitcoin trust. These are new ones. So the Bitcoin trust is going to be an ETF. fees are higher than with Fidelity or with BlackRock, hence why there is an outflow from the Grayscale Trust into the other ETFs, but there is also the forced liquidation from FTX in this trust, which is like 1.5 billion or 2 billion or so, which is something we should add on this number, to be fair, because that sell-off is going to have a delay before it comes back into the market, because it has to be withdrawn towards the clients of FTX, and perhaps they put it back into the markets, but that's going to have a very long delay. Now, total volume is great. Total flow means outflow, inflow. So the minus is negative. The positive numbers are the pink ones, which gives a net inflow of 2.2 billion, and without GBTC it's 8.5 into these three, but I guess it's somewhere in between those numbers, which means that it's somewhere around 3.8. That is the net inflow without last Friday. The assets that are in the ETF, you can see that Fidelity and iShares are by far the largest ones. And then we've got the volume on a specific day is less important. But the key point is that the sentiment has changed, in which the markets are into such a positive inflow at this point, or a positive manner, that you can see that overall, I mean, people are just going towards Bitcoin. It's just a fact at this stage. Now, the markets. Overall, I still tend to believe that there's going to be a longer period of relative consolidation. Perhaps people are suggesting that there is a weekly bearish divergence. I wouldn't suggest that it's one. Ultimately, I think that we're going to have a consolidation happening. My first scenario was a case of having consolidation before continuation, of course. But at this point, we are very likely taking out this high, and we are very likely taking out these two, which means that if we start to zoom in a little bit more, it seems likely that we're ending somewhere in this ballpark, which means 54k to like 58k perhaps is going to bring us a short-term peak, then have another correction, and then we start to continue going up. All right. And that is different than my first thesis, and I think being subject to change is just fine. Because in theory, what we see in the markets are corrections that are relatively slim still. There will be bigger corrections at some point in time. I don't believe we're going to see this. To be fair, I think we're going to have a 2017 type of cycle in which we probably are going to land. We're going to land around here and then consolidate before we continue. But anyway, so what did we see? Run to the ETF, 49k was hit, took the liquidity here, great, got back, took the liquidity beneath, and then started to rally up. So now we've got like a consolidative period, which means that perhaps we're still going to see 40k at some point in time. But it's all a matter of how high is Bitcoin going to come in terms of price action. And I'll get to the end, the question of when to buy, when to sell at the later part. So my first theory is that we are peaking out somewhere in the range of 50k, somewhere in this ballpark, after which we consolidate and correct, the Bitcoin hype goes away. And from there, later this year, we've got a new all-time high. The difference with that theory is that we've got ETF buyers getting into the markets. And the difference is that the ETF itself enables a large group of investors to jump into markets that they didn't have access to at the beginning. Perhaps they want to right now, and the Bitcoin halving is such a massive narrative to get into the markets as a whole. All right. So in that aspect, with this recent move, I think overall short term we probably are going to consolidate. I don't believe we're going to push in one go. But there is a reasonable scenario to suggest that we have another push towards this region, and from there have the standard correction. So now this range bound construction has like a chance of perhaps 40% to happen. I think this is a 60% chance to happen at this point, and I'll just take the assumption that we reach 56k and then have the 20, which is 45k, to 30% correction, which is 39k. It's very rare to have a 40% correction. So I'm guessing that this is the ballpark that we need to work with, which means that we are going to consolidate a little bit, continue to grind, have the pre-halving rally. Don't look at the time frame. I'll just make sure that I'm doing it right. Sorry. All right, so here we have the peak. We consolidate, continue to fall, and somewhere here we land, which creates another higher low. And from there we start to peak and start riding upwards, in which 2025 and perhaps even 2026 we're going to have a new bull run. All right, so those are the two scenarios. Now, what is a game plan? I think the easy part is to get a game plan for buying. All right, so if you have the assumption that the likelihood of getting here is very slim, how do you assume that you're going to get into a position? Well, I think going back into history, it seems legitimate that we're going to have a correction after the actual halving takes place, right? So if we get here and you don't have a position, there are a few options. You can just DCA for the coming 3 months and just buy a portion every week, and then you have a nice average. Or the second one is that if we reach it here and have a standard correction of 20% to 30%, that is your point to get in. All right. Can also be the case that from here at 51k we have it and go back to 38. Who knows? Would be great. But use those corrections to get into the markets. That's just a very easy answer. Getting out is more difficult, because if you are in the markets from an investment perspective and you just listen to my first part of this video and you're concerned about your future, I think you don't want to gamble at this part of the markets. The only way you could do is that if we're getting close to the halving and Bitcoin is getting a little overpriced into the 56k region without any correction or speaking or anything comparable to it. If that happens, that is a case where you can start selling like 10 to 20% to be able to buy back in if that correction takes place. Never sell it all, just take it small. Just have a slight allocation that you're going to sell and use that to buy back into the markets to get a little bit more Bitcoin, or use that to buy altcoins when it comes to the correction, because that topic we're going to discuss tomorrow. I hope you have enjoyed this rambling about Putin and about the entire markets. Next week we're going to dive a little bit more into the markets as a whole. Tomorrow, altcoin update. Hopefully next week I'll be giving you the $1,000 strategy. If you want to see any specific content, can be about anything, comment beneath. That's going to be great. I need your help so we can all define the best content that we can make. Enjoy your weekend. Ciao.